The Durango stage arrived on the afternoon of October 9th, 1878, with the San Juan Mountains going red and gold behind it. And the last woman off the step was carrying a leather medical case, in addition to her carpetbag, which should have been the first indication that she was not the kind of woman who walked away from a problem. Josephine Pell was 28 years old. She set her carpetbag down on the depot platform and looked at the depot and then at the mountains, which were the most dramatic things she had ever seen in her life, and which she gave approximately 3 seconds of appreciation before she turned her attention back to the situation. The ranch hand who met her at the stage was 63 years old, with a face like weathered oak and the name Burl Ames, and he told her what he had to tell her plainly and without preamble. Cole Sutter, the man she had come 2,000 miles to marry, had been bitten by a rattlesnake 4 days prior and was in a ranch house 8 miles up the Animas River with a 50-50 chance of seeing the weekend. Josephine listened to all of this. Then she said, "Has the wound been cleaned properly?" Burl said he had done his best. Josephine said, "Then we're not out of time yet." She asked where the eastbound stage was. Burl told her Thursday. She nodded and picked up her carpetbag. She had not considered Thursday. She could have. That was the thing she would think about later, sitting with Cole in the lamplight on the 5th day. Thursday had been a real option. The situation had been honestly described to her. No one had asked her to stay. Burl had made it clear that the contract was void if she walked. Thursday was 3 days away, and the nearest station was right here, and she had the money for the fare. She had asked where the sick man was instead. That single question changed everything. But to understand why Josephine Pell asked where the sick man was instead of waiting for Thursday, we have to go back to a charity hospital in Cincinnati 4 years before, and the first night she sat with someone through the dark and decided she was not going anywhere. Josephine had come to the charity hospital at 22, the eldest of 5 children of a printer whose press had burned in a fire when she was 17. A fire that had taken the press and most of their savings and something important in her father's spirit, and left the family in the specific kind of genteel poverty where you have the manners and education of people with means and the means of people without. She had learned to sew before the fire, and after it she sewed for money, which was different from sewing as an accomplishment, and required different things of you. A woman at the church her family attended mentioned the charity hospital and said they were looking for aides, women with clean hands and a steady disposition, and no particular squeamishness. Josephine had applied with the specific practicality of a woman who understood that her skills were the hospital's needs, and was hired the same afternoon she applied. 4 years at the Cincinnati Charity Hospital had taught her a great many things. It had taught her that suffering was a fact and not a judgment. It had taught her the specific arithmetic of keeping someone alive when everything is running against you, the doses and the timing and the monitoring and the 1,000 small decisions that added up over hours and days to a person still breathing. It had taught her to sit with people through the dark of the night and not be frightened of what she might find in the morning. She had sat with an old man named Mr. Aldrich on a November night in her 2nd year. He was dying of the kind of thing that people in charity hospitals died of then, slowly, and with less dignity than he deserved, and there was nothing that medicine could do about the dying, only about the quality of the hours remaining. She had sat with him through the night because someone had to, and because she was there, and because she understood, without needing to reason it out, that being present when a person needed someone present was the whole of the medicine sometimes. He had died at 4 a.m, with her hand on his, and she had sat with that for a while before she called for the doctor. The hospital had closed 2 years later, funding dissolved, the board dispersed, the building sold. Josephine had returned to sewing, which she was good at, and she had thought about the hospital for 3 more years, and about what it had taught her, and about what it had been like to know exactly what to do, and to have the skill to do it, and about Miss Aldrich. She had answered Cole Sutter's advertisement in the bride registry because it was in Colorado territory, which was distant, and because the registry described him as a cattle rancher of 10 years standing, which meant a man who had built something, and because she had decided, at 28, deliberately and with the particular clarity of a woman who has thought something through and reached the far side of it, that she wanted land and space and a life of her own choosing, and the West was where those things were. She had not known when she wrote the letter that Cole Sutter would be bitten by a rattlesnake 4 days before her arrival. She had not planned on any of this. She had simply shown up and found a situation. And a situation was the kind of thing she knew what to do with. Burl drove her the 8 miles up the Animas River Road to the Sutter Ranch in the fading afternoon, and she sat on the wagon bench with her carpet bag at her feet and her medical case on her knee and watched the mountain country go past. It was gold and rust and the deep green of the pines, and the Animas River ran cold and clear below the road, and the San Juans were enormous above everything, and under other circumstances she would have found it one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen. She was thinking about the wound. She had asked Burl more questions on the road, the location of the bite, how the wound had been managed so far, what symptoms Cole was showing. How long since the bite? 4 days since a rattlesnake bite on the right forearm was bad but not necessarily fatal. Rattlesnake venom moved at its own pace, and the outcome depended on a great many factors. She had seen a rattlesnake bite case at the Cincinnati hospital. Only one. She was not an expert, and she remembered it well enough to know that the first thing was to look at the wound and make an honest assessment. She arrived at the Sutter Animas Ranch at dusk. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, and better built. Cole Sutter had built to last. The logs tight and the roof sound. The main room warm and clean, with the fire going. The sick room was off the main room, small and dim, with a window that faced west, and was letting in the last of the evening light. Cole Sutter was 34 years old, and 2 days into his fever's worst, which meant he was not entirely conscious and not entirely unconscious, but somewhere in between. His right forearm wrapped in cloth that needed changing, and his color, the specific wrong color of a man whose body is fighting something with everything it has. Josephine set her carpetbag down. She opened her medical case on the bedside table and looked at his arm and made her assessment. She had time. She was not out of time yet. She sent Burl for hot water and clean cloth, and told him what else she needed from the kitchen, the carbolic, if there was any, and specific other things. And she began. The first thing was to clean the wound properly, which had not been done as it needed to be. She did this with the same focused calm she had brought to everything at the hospital, talking to Cole in a low voice not because she thought he could fully hear her, but because she had learned that the sound of a calm voice was itself a kind of medicine. She told him what she was doing and why, in plain terms, and worked steadily. The first night was the hardest. She managed the fever with cool cloths applied at regular intervals, and she kept the lamp lit as Burl had told her Cole needed it. He had told her that Cole was afraid of the dark with a fever, which was a thing she had seen before in sick men, the fever making everything larger and more frightening, and she sat beside the bed through the night and monitored and did what could be done. At 3 a.m. she was still awake, and Cole was still fighting, and the medical case was open on the table beside her, and the lamp was steady, and she thought about Mr. Aldrich, and about sitting through the dark, and about what it meant to be present when presence was the medicine. She thought, I am not going anywhere. She had not been going anywhere since she said, "Where is he?" at the Durango depot, but this was the moment she understood that she had made the decision fully and without reservation, and it settled something in her that had been in the process of settling since Thursday stopped being an option she was considering. On the second morning, she fed Cole's horses before anyone had suggested she might. She went to the barn at first light because the animals needed feeding and no one else was doing it. Burl was exhausted from 3 days of sitting with Cole before her arrival, and she had sent him to his bunk at midnight. And she worked through the stalls with a feed bucket she found in the tack room, with the efficient confidence of a woman who knows what needs doing and does it. Burl found her in the barn when he woke. He stood in the barn doorway and looked at her moving through the stalls and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Lord help the man when he wakes up and sees what he's got." She handed him the empty feed bucket. On the third morning, Hector Sutter arrived. He was 50, Cole's older brother. Heavier in the face than Cole, and with the specific kind of confidence that comes from having always been the older one, the one with opinions. He had a saddlebag of papers and the certainty that Cole was dying. He came into the ranch house and looked at Josephine and said she had no legal standing. The contract was void, and she should make arrangements for herself. He said it not unkindly. He simply did not consider her a variable in the situation. Josephine was standing between him and the bedroom door, holding a bowl of broth in both hands. She listened to all of it. Then she said she would go check on the patient. She went into the bedroom and closed the door. On the other side of the door, through the wood, she could hear Hector beginning to lay papers out on the table in the main room. The rustle of documents, the deliberate sound of a man arranging the legal reality he intended to present. Neighboring ranchers, Burl had told her, 2 of them, had been partially persuaded to Hector's management scheme. They would come, he thought, on the 4th day or the 5th. Josephine sat on the edge of Cole's bed and put her hand on his forehead. Still hot, still too hot, but not hotter than yesterday, which was something. She said to him, in the low, steady voice she had been using, "You have a brother who intends to sign your ranch away before you're in any position to prevent it. I am going to prevent it by keeping you alive until you can prevent it yourself. So I need you to stay with me a while longer." Cole's hand, on the blanket, shifted toward her. Not quite a grip, something closer to acknowledgement. She took his hand in both of hers and held it, and kept talking to him, low and even, telling him about the horses fed, and the stalls clean, and the broth she had made, and about the San Juan Mountains, which she had had 30 seconds to look at properly, and found extraordinary. On the 4th day, Burl told her about the Animas Ranch. He told her what it was worth, a solid, well-built operation, one of the best producing spreads in the San Juan Basin, built from a land grant in 10 years of Cole's work. He told her that Hector had wanted the ranch for 12 years and had been waiting for an opening. He told her about the 2 neighboring ranchers who had half agreed to the management scheme, and about what would happen to the operation if Cole died, or if Hector succeeded in making the management arrangements legal before Cole was conscious. Josephine listened to all of this and then said, "He told me he thought I might actually stay." Burl said, "Beg pardon?" She said, "You said Cole talked about the letter I sent with the registry paperwork. You said he told you he thought I might actually stay. Did he read the letter where I described my nursing background?" Burl said, "That's the one. Said you sounded like someone who didn't rattle easy." She said, "He was right." She went back into the bedroom. That fourth night was the longest. The fever was at its peak, and she managed it through the night with everything she had: the cool cloths, the timing of the doses, the monitoring, the low, steady voice. The lamp kept lit. She did not sleep. She sat with the nurse's aid case open on the table, and Cole's hand occasionally finding hers on the blanket. And she thought about the Thursday eastbound, and what would have been in that ranch house on Friday if she had taken it. Not this. Whatever this was, it would not have been here. She thought, I do not know what this is yet. I know that I am not going anywhere until I find out. She thought, that has been true since the depot. On the fifth morning, at dawn, the fever broke. She watched it happen, the sweat, and then the color coming back, the specific wrong color resolving toward something closer to right. She checked the wound and it was improving, the inflammation retreating, the body beginning to win the argument with the venom. She sat back in her chair. She had been awake for most of 36 hours. She was aware of this, but not distressed by it. She had been awake for 36 hours before at the Cincinnati hospital, and she had managed. She was still sitting there, the medical case open on the table beside the steady lamp, when Cole Sutter opened his eyes. He was not fully conscious. He was at the surface of consciousness, looking up through it, and what he found there was a woman he had never met, sitting beside his bed in the early light of a Colorado morning, with her hands folded in her lap, and an expression of professional calm. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the specific directness of a man who is not fully awake and therefore cannot be diplomatic, "You're not Burl." She said, "No." He said, "Who are you?" She said, "Josephine Pell. I'm the bride you sent for." There was a pause. He appeared to be processing this. He said, "How long have I?" She said, 5 days since I arrived. 4 since the bite. You're going to be all right." He closed his eyes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The horses." She said, "Fed. 2 days running." His hand on the blanket turned over, palm up, a small gesture. She recognized it as an acknowledgement, as something between yes and thank you. She put her hand in his briefly, and then took it back. She went to make coffee. The 2 neighboring ranchers arrived on the 5th day, as Burl had predicted, to witness whatever Hector had arranged. They arrived to find Josephine at the door with a bowl of broth, which she was taking into the bedroom, and Hector in the main room with papers spread on the table. She said, "He's awake." Hector said, "Barely awake is not competent to," she said. "Excuse me." She went into the bedroom with the broth. She gave Cole the broth. He managed most of it, which was more than he had managed in 5 days. She told him about Hector and the papers and the 2 neighboring ranchers who had come to witness something. She told him plainly, the way she told everything. He said, "My coat." She found his coat on the hook behind the door. He said, "Inside pocket." She found the documents, the registry contract, and 2 others she could not immediately identify. He said, "Read me the contract." She read him the registry contract. He listened. He said, "My pen." She gave him the pen from the desk. He signed the registry contract at the bottom and wrote 2 words above his signature, which she read after he had done it, still standing. He said, "Go get Hector." Hector came. The 2 neighboring ranchers came. Cole, propped against the headboard with the look of a man who has been very unwell and has decided he is going to be well now, looked at Hector and said, "I'm signing my own paperwork. You can stay for coffee, or you can go home." Hector looked at the signed contract. He looked at Cole's face, which had the particular quality of a man who is not going to be moved from a position. He said, "Cole, you're not well enough," Cole said. "I signed my own name. You know my name. "This is Josephine." He looked at Josephine. He said, "Tell them your terms." Josephine stood in the doorway with the medical case open on the table behind her and the two neighboring ranchers looking at her, and she said she wanted a proper accounting of the ranch's assets from the past 3 years, because she intended to know what she was coming into. She wanted a formal introduction to the ranch's operations from Burl, who knew them best. And she wanted the bedroom window to face east instead of west, if it could be managed in the spring, because east light was better in the mornings. There was a silence. One of the neighboring ranchers said, "She's talking about staying." Cole said yes. Josephine said, "I said I would." The two neighboring ranchers went home. Hector looked at Cole for a long moment, and then looked at Josephine, and then left without discussing the management scheme further. Cole recovered over the 3 weeks that followed. He recovered the way a man recovers when the person managing his recovery is both good at it and interested in him being well gradually, steadily. With Josephine managing the convalescence the same way she had managed the crisis, with focused calm and the specific competence of someone who knows what she is doing. They talked in those 3 weeks, not the way they had talked in the first 5 days, which had been mostly her talking and him being ill and barely present. They talked properly about the ranch and its history, about the San Juan Basin and the cattle operations and the water rights that ran along the Animas. They talked about Cincinnati and the hospital and Mr. Aldrich, which she had not talked about to anyone in some time. They talked about the Thursday eastbound and what it would have meant. Cole said, on the 10th day of his recovery, when he was sitting up without assistance for the first time, "You could have taken Thursday." She said, "I know." He said, "Why didn't you?" She said, "You were sick. I knew how to help." He said, "That's all?" She thought about it. She said, "It was enough to start." He looked at the medical case, which was on the shelf now. She had moved it from the bedside table as he improved, giving him back the table, claiming the shelf. The case was still closed. She still kept it latched during the day. He had asked about it on the 2nd day of his consciousness, and she had told him where it came from. And he had listened with the full attention of a man who has recently been made aware of exactly what another person's skill and care is worth. He said, "What would it take to make you stay past the contract?" She looked at him. He said, "I'm asking your terms." You said name your terms in front of 2 witnesses. I'm naming mine. I'd like you to stay. That's my term. She said, "That's an offer, not a term." He said, "What's the term?" She said, "I'd like to keep the accounts." He said, "Done." She said, "And the east-facing window?" He said, "Spring." She said, "And I'd like to keep the medical case on the shelf." He said, "It can go anywhere it wants." She looked at him, propped against the headboard in the morning light, which was the wrong light because the window faced west, which they were going to fix in the spring. She thought about the nurse's aid case on the shelf, open. She thought about Thursday. She said, "All right." They married in Durango in December 1878. Burl as witness. The ceremony attended by the 2 neighboring ranchers, who had come to witness a ranch transfer and ended up witnessing something else entirely. They had been at the wedding to be polite and had stayed for the meal, which Josephine had planned, which was good enough that they talked about it in the San Juan Basin for some time afterward. The nurse's aid case was placed on the ranch house shelf after the wedding, not the bedroom shelf, which they had decided to use for other things, but the main room shelf, in the light from the west window open. Its contents were no longer an emergency. They were a history. In the evenings, when the day's work was done and the fire was going, Cole lit the lamp on the bedroom table. The same lamp Josephine had kept burning through 5 nights, and Josephine watched him do it from the doorway. her hand resting on the open latch of the case on the shelf behind her. He had been afraid of the dark with a fever. He was not afraid of it now. He lit the lamp anyway, every evening, in the way a person maintains a habit that has become an act of remembering. She thought he was remembering 5 nights, and a lamp kept steady by a woman who had not taken the Thursday stage. She thought she did not mind being remembered that way. There are people in this world who help when it costs them nothing. And then there are people who help when it costs them everything: their sleep, their plans, their safety, their Thursday options. And don't think of it as help at all. Just as obvious. Just as what you do when someone in front of you needs what you have. Josephine Pell had spent 4 years in a Cincinnati charity hospital learning that lesson. She had learned it early, and she had carried it west, and it had served her, finally, in exactly the way she had always hoped, not as a sacrifice, but as a calling. She had asked where the sick man was. She had stayed. She had kept the lamp lit, and when he woke up, he saw her, specifically her, and had the absolute clarity of someone who has almost not made it to say so. If this story found you today, if something in Josephine's quiet competence or Cole's plain direct gratitude settled in you, stay with us. There are more stories here, and every one of them is about someone who stayed when they could have gone. But the story of Cole Sutter's recovery was also the story of Josephine learning what she had come to. She had known the ranch by its accounts before she knew it by its land. That was the kind of woman she was. She mapped things through numbers first, through the specific weight of figures on a page, and only afterward through the physical world. She had asked Cole, on the 7th day of his recovery when he was sitting up and speaking clearly, to show her the ranch accounts. He had shown her the accounts. They were in reasonable order. Cole was not a careless man, but she found 3 places where the pricing for the Durango cattle market had been miscalculated, small compounding errors that had been costing him a consistent percentage over 2 seasons. She told him about the errors and corrected them while he watched. And he said, "How did you learn to keep books?" She said, "Hospital. You run a charity hospital on nothing and you learn to account for every penny." He said, "What else did you learn?" She said, "A great deal about what bodies need when things go wrong." He said, "And what else?" She thought about it. She said, "That being present is sometimes the whole of the medicine. That some things cannot be fixed, only witnessed and held, and not turned away from." He was quiet for a while. He said, "You were going to walk away. In Durango." She said, "I wasn't." He said, "Burl said you asked where I was." She said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you wait for Thursday?" She had already answered this once, but she thought he was asking a different version of the question now. Not why did she stay at the depot, but why, as a matter of who she was, had Thursday never been a real option. She said, "I was 4 years in a charity hospital. The last night I sat with a man through his dying. I held his hand for 3 hours and he died at 4 in the morning, and I called for the doctor, and then I sat with it for a while, the fact of him being gone, and I thought, that is the thing I know how to do. Sit with something through the night and not turn away. I had that in me when I got off the stage. You were sick. I knew what to do." Cole said, "And if I died anyway?" She said, "Then you would have had someone with you." He was very still for a moment. Then he said, "That would have been enough?" She said, "That's always enough." He looked at the lamp on the table, the lamp she had kept burning through 5 nights. He had been afraid of the dark with a fever, a specific fear he had never fully explained to anyone, the fever making the dark very large and very empty. She had kept the lamp lit not because he asked, but because Burl had told her, and she had kept it without making anything of it. Just, the lamp stays on. 5 nights. She had made no comment about it and had never referred to it. He said, "The lamp." She said, "What about it?" He said, "You kept it." She said, "Burl told me you needed it." He said, "I know. He was looking at the lamp. I don't usually. It's not something I'd..." He stopped. He started again. "Thank you." She said, "You're welcome." They sat in the lamplight for a while without talking. Burl came and found Josephine in the barn on the 6th day of Cole's recovery, when Cole was sleeping in the afternoon and she had gone to check on the horses, and he sat on the fence rail and said to her, "He's going to be all right now." She said, "Yes." Burl said, "I wasn't sure. I've been not sure for 8 days." She said, "I know." He said, "You weren't." She said, "I wasn't what?" He said, "Unsure. You came in here, and you weren't unsure for 1 minute." She thought about that. She said, "I was unsure. I just couldn't afford to show it. There's a difference." Burl looked at her for a moment. He said, "He told me you sounded like someone who didn't rattle easy. I thought he was being hopeful." She said, "He was right enough." Burl said, "Yes, ma'am." He climbed down from the fence. He said, over his shoulder, heading back to the barn, "He needs someone who doesn't rattle easy. Place like this, mountain country, the problems are real. He needed someone real." She watched him go. She thought about the word real, about what it meant to be real in the way Burl meant it, not performed, not managing impressions, not braced against something, just present and capable and willing to stay. She had been working on being real for a long time. She thought she might be getting better at it. In the 2nd week of Cole's recovery, a rancher from the next valley over came to call. His name was Sutherland, one of the 2 who had been partially persuaded to Hector's scheme. And he came with his hat in his hand, and the manner of a man who has reconsidered a position and is here to say so. He said he had heard about the situation, the bite, the illness, the bride contract woman who had kept the Sutter place running for 8 days straight, and he wanted to say he was glad Cole was on his feet. Cole said, "Thank you for coming." Sutherland said, "The woman, Miss Pell, she's staying on then?" Cole said, "She is." Sutherland looked at Josephine, who was at the kitchen table doing the accounts. He said, "I heard she cleaned the wound herself." Day 1. Josephine said, without looking up, "It needed cleaning." Sutherland said, "I have a wife who ailed last spring and the doctor we got wasn't." He stopped. He said, "I wanted to say I'm glad you were here. That's all." She looked up then. She said, "I'm glad too." Sutherland left. Cole looked at her from across the room and she looked back at him, and they did not say anything about it, which was their way. In the 3rd week, Cole was on his feet enough to go outside. He walked the ranch for the first time in 3 weeks, on a clear Colorado morning. Josephine beside him because she was monitoring the recovery still, and because walking was the right medicine at this stage, and they went around the perimeter of the near fields and down to the river and back. He moved slowly, and she matched her pace to his without comment. At the river he stopped and looked at the water, which was running cold and clear over stones, the color of iron, and the mountains were very close above them, the pines going dark green against the sky. He said, "I built this." She said, "I know." He said, 10 years. Every fence post." She said, "The accounts show that." He said, "What else do the accounts show?" She said, "That you pay your hands fairly, that you don't cut corners on the winter feed, that you've been expanding the breeding stock gradually rather than aggressively, which is the right choice for this terrain, that whoever taught you cattle taught you correctly." He said, "My father." She said, "He taught you well." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the river. He said, "You learned ranching from the accounts." She said, "I learned things from numbers. It's how I'm made." He said, "What did you learn about me?" She said that you're careful, that you plan ahead, that you value quality over quantity, that you have been doing all of this alone for 10 years, and that the accounts show what it costs, not financially, but in the particular way that a one-person operation has no margin for the unexpected. He said, "No margin." She said, "A rattlesnake, for instance." He was quiet. He said, "And now?" She said, "Now there's margin." He looked at the river for a moment more. Then he said, "Come on. You'll make me walk back uphill for the exercise." She walked him back uphill. That was the third week, and after that the recovery was simply recovery, the incremental daily business of a body returning to itself, which she managed as she had managed the crisis, with the steady competence of someone who knows that the work is the work, regardless of the drama level. By December, when they married in Durango with Burl as witness, and Sutherland and his wife in the small congregation, Cole was fully himself again. He had the color back, and the strength back, and the particular way of moving that was his, deliberate and unhurried. The way of a man who has 20 things to do today, and intends to do all of them correctly. He stood at the front of the Durango church, and watched Josephine come up the aisle toward him, and his expression was the expression of a man who is doing the accounting of a situation, and finding the results better than he expected. She came to stand beside him. She was carrying the medical case. She had brought it because it was her most important possession, and she did not want to leave it at the boarding house. He looked at the case. He said, quietly, "Is that necessary for the ceremony?" She said, "Probably not. I'll put it down." She set it on the pew beside Burl. The ceremony was short. When it was over, Josephine picked up the case, and they went out into the Colorado December, which was cold and clean and smelled of pine, and Burl had the wagon, and the mountains were there above them where they always were. On the drive back to the ranch, Cole said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "All right." He said, "Before I wrote to the registry, I had written twice before, and both women came and left when they saw how far the ranch was from town. I'd given up on the idea. I wrote the third time because Burl said I should, and I said I thought it was pointless, and he said try one more time and write honestly about what the place is. So I wrote honestly." She said, "I know. I read the letter." He said, "You came anyway." She said, "You described a ranch 10 miles from the nearest town in the San Juan Mountains. I read that as space and distance and a life that is the size of the actual work. That was what I wanted." He said, "Most women want town." She said, "I'm not most women." He said, "I know. That's the thing." They rode the rest of the way in the comfortable silence that had developed between them over the preceding weeks, not empty, not strained. The silence of two people who have been through something together and have settled into the knowledge of each other that comes from that. The ranch house was warm when they arrived. Burl had kept the fire going. Josephine set the medical case on the shelf in the main room, not the bedroom shelf, the main room, where the light from the west window fell on it in the afternoons, and did not latch it. She would not latch it again, she decided. Its contents were not an emergency anymore. They were a history and a skill, and the specific record of who she was and where she had come from, and that was worth keeping visible. Cole lit the lamp in the bedroom that evening. The same lamp, the same steady flame. And Josephine watched him do it from the doorway, with her hand on the open latch of the case on the shelf behind her. She thought, This is what it looks like when a thing is over and a different thing is begun. She thought, I am very glad I asked where he was. She went to help with supper, and the lamp stayed lit, and the medical case stayed open on the shelf. And the San Juan Mountains were where they always were, enormous and indifferent and beautiful, and the Animas River ran cold and clear below the road, and none of this had existed 3 months ago, and all of it was real now. Some debts don't work the way the world says they should. Sometimes the person who saves you becomes the one thing you cannot imagine owing anything to. Because they gave it before you could ask, and because asking would have changed what it was. Josephine Pell had not been asked. She had seen what was needed, and she had done what she knew. That was the whole of it. The rest was just what happened when a woman who didn't rattle easy stayed where she was and let things become what they were going to become. If something in this story stayed with you today, if Josephine's steadiness or Cole's particular clarity found its way to you, stay with us a little longer. There are more stories here, and every one of them is about what happens when someone stays. There was a morning in the first week of Cole's recovery when Hector Sutter came back. He had not given up entirely on the ranch management scheme. He had retreated after the signed contract and Cole's direct dismissal, but retreat was not the same as abandonment, and Hector Sutter had 12 years of wanting the Animas Ranch behind him, and one setback was not going to settle it. He came on a Tuesday morning, without announcement, while Cole was resting after the morning's exercises, and Josephine was at the kitchen table with the accounts. He knocked on the door. She opened it. He said, "I'd like to speak with Cole." She said, "He's resting. You can come back in the afternoon." He said, "I'll wait." She said, "In Durango." He looked at her. She met his look without changing her expression, which was the expression she had learned at the Cincinnati hospital for managing family members who were making difficult situations more difficult, polite, direct, and entirely unmovable. He said, "Miss Pell, I understand you've been helpful, and I want you to know I don't have anything against you personally. But there are practical matters related to this ranch's operations that need to be settled," she said. "The practical matters related to this ranch's operations are settled. Cole signed his own contract. He is recovering and will be fully capable of managing his affairs within the week. If you have concerns about the ranch's management, you can raise them with Cole when he is ready to receive them." She paused. "In the afternoon." At the earliest. Hector studied her for a moment with the expression of a man reassessing something he thought he understood. He said, "You're staying." She said, "Yes." He said, "You know what you're taking on. This ranch is isolated. The work is hard. The winters," she said. "I read the advertisement. I came knowing what it was." He said, "Most women." She said, "I'm not most women. Cole has said that. I've said that. You might want to take it as settled." There was a silence. Hector looked past her into the kitchen, the accounts on the table, the medical case on the shelf, the fire going, the house in the particular order of a house that is being actively managed, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite softening, but changing. From the calculation of a man who thinks he has an opening to the calculation of a man beginning to understand that he doesn't. He said, "You cleaned the wound yourself." She said, "Yes." He said, 5 days of fever." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "He's my brother." She said, "I know." He said, "I wasn't wrong to be concerned. He could have died." She said, "He almost did." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Will you tell him? I'll come back in the afternoon. I'd like to see how he is." She said, "I'll tell him." He rode away. He came back in the afternoon, and he sat with Cole for an hour, and they talked as brothers who have been at cross purposes will sometimes talk when one of them has almost not survived, with more honesty than usual. Josephine did not listen. She was in the kitchen with the accounts, and she did not need to listen, because she could tell from Cole's voice afterward, not the words, just the register of it, that the conversation had been real in a way that the previous one had not been. She did not ask about it. Cole did not explain it. This was also their way. Hector left for where he had come from with a different understanding than he had arrived with, and he came back twice more that winter, each time with less paperwork and more conversation. And by spring he was no longer an antagonist, but simply Cole's brother, who had opinions and could be managed. People were manageable, Josephine had found, when you were honest with them about what the situation was. It was the dishonesty that made things complicated. She thought, this is also what I learned in the hospital. In January, when the San Juan winter had arrived in earnest and the ranch was snowed in for a week, she and Cole went through the ranch records together. Not just the accounts, but the full history of the operation. 10 years of record-keeping in Cole's precise hand. She found, reading backward through the records, the specific shape of what he had built and how he had built it. The first cattle purchase on a land grant, with no capital to spare. The gradual expansion of the breeding stock. The feed calculations that had been revised each winter as he learned the terrain better. The wages paid to the 3 hands he had employed over the years. All of them noted and regular. She found, in the second year's records, a notation she asked him about. February 14, Cora left. Settled accounts. He was quiet for a moment. He said, she was the first. She came from the registry and stayed 8 months, and went back to St. Louis, when the isolation got to be too much. She was honest about it. She said she tried, but the mountains were too much. Josephine said, and then? He said then there was a woman from Colorado Springs who came and lasted 6 weeks. She didn't like the elevation. He almost smiled at that. And then I thought I was done with trying. She said, Burl said you weren't. He said Burl is persistent. She said, he was right. He said yes. He was quiet for a moment. I wrote that letter differently than the other 2. The other 2 I made it sound more accessible, more like a town situation with a ranch attached. This time I said exactly what it was. 10 miles from Durango, 2 miles up a mountain road, cold 6 months of the year. The work is cattle and the nearest neighbor is 4 miles. She said, I remember the letter. He said, you came anyway. She said it sounded like what I wanted. He looked at her. He said you knew, from that letter, what you were coming to. She said, I know what mountains mean. I know what isolated means. I know what cattle work means. He said, from the hospital? She said, from being alive and paying attention. He closed the record book and set it aside. He said, I'm glad Burl was persistent. She said, so am I. The snow was deep outside the windows, and the fire was going, and the lamp was lit, and the medical case was open on the shelf, and the accounts were correct, and this was their life, the specific shape of it. She had not known it would look like this. She had not known much, getting off that stage with her carpetbag and her case, watching the San Juan Mountains go red in the afternoon light. She had known one thing. She was not going to take Thursday. The rest had been what happened when you stayed. There was a morning in late November when Josephine woke before Cole and lay in the dark for a while, the mountain quiet outside the window, and thought about Thursday. Not regret. She had not had a moment of regret since she asked where the sick man was. But she thought about it the way you think about a road you did not take. What would the Thursday eastbound have looked like? From inside it. What would she have felt, sitting in the rail car going east, while Cole Sutter went the other direction on the Fever. She thought, I would have been thinking about him. From the moment the train left the station, I would have been thinking about him. She thought, I would have wondered for the rest of my life. She thought, that is the thing about walking away from a situation you know how to help, you carry it. It is not a neutral choice. The walk away is not nothing. She got up and built the fire. Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway as the coffee water was coming to heat and stopped there for a moment, as he always did, taking account of what was present in the room. She said, I was thinking about Thursday. He came to the table and poured coffee. She had left the cup at his place already and sat. He said, what about it? She said, about what the train east would have been like. He said, cold. She said, I mean inside what it would have felt like. He said, I know what you mean. He looked at his coffee. He said, I know what it would have been like for me. On the other end. She looked at him. He said, I was not going to make it past the weekend, Josephine, not without help. Burl is a good man, but he's not a nurse's aide, and the wound needed what you gave it. She said, you don't know that. He said, I know it. She said, you're alive. You can't know what the other. He said, I know it. She looked at him across the table in the morning kitchen, the fire going and the coffee steam rising, the San Juan Mountains outside the window invisible in the dark but present, as they always were. Cole Sutter, alive and well, and sitting across from her with his coffee, who had been a very sick man in a dim room 10 weeks ago. She thought, he is sitting here. She thought that is the whole of the argument. She picked up her coffee. She said, I'm glad I didn't take Thursday. He said, yes. He looked at his coffee for a moment. Then, so am I. In ways I can't fully. He stopped. He said, you kept the lamp lit. She said, yes. He said, 5 nights. She said, you needed it. He said, I know. I'm not. He looked at the lamp on the table, the morning lamp, different from the bedroom lamp but the same kind of thing, steady, reliable, chosen. He said, there's a thing about being very ill. You're more. Everything is larger. Everything matters more. The fear is larger, and the cold is larger, and the dark is larger. And the light is everything. She said, I know. He said, and you kept it. She said, of course I did. He nodded and drank his coffee and looked out the window at the dark mountain morning. And she drank her coffee and thought about lamps and about staying, and the fire crackled in the stove, and outside the San Juan Mountains were beginning to come up in the first gray light of a Colorado November. This was what it looked like. The morning kitchen, the steady lamp, the coffee, the window with the light coming, a man who had almost not made it sitting across the table. This was everything Thursday had not been. She was glad to have the everything. She had a letter from Cincinnati in December, from the printer's daughter who had been at the hospital the same years she had. A friendship by correspondence maintained across years and distances. The letter had taken 3 weeks to reach the San Juan Ranch, forwarded through the Durango Post. The letter said, I hope Colorado suits you. I hope the man you went to marry is worth the 2,000 miles. I hope you found what you were looking for. Josephine read the letter twice, and then wrote back. She described the mountains, which she was still adjusting to, still startled sometimes by their scale. She described the ranch and the cattle and the accounts. She described what the work was and what she had found herself good at. She described Cole in the way you describe someone to a person who knows you well and can read what you're not quite saying. She said he was careful and direct and did not make more of things than they were, and that the accounts showed his character with more clarity than any conversation could, and that he had been bitten by a rattlesnake 4 days before her arrival, and she had spent 5 days nursing him back to coherence, and that at the end of those 5 days he had signed his own contract and written still standing above his name. She did not say, and I knew then. She did not say, and that was when I understood that whatever this was, it was going to be something. She did not need to say it. Her friend would read it. She put the letter in the Durango Post on her next trip to town, which was the following week, and stood outside the post office for a moment looking at the mountains, the San Juans enormous and cold and brilliant in the winter sun, and thought about the letter, and about the friend who had asked if she found what she was looking for. She had not been looking for what she found. She had been looking for space and distance and a life that was the size of the actual work, and she had found that. And she had also found something she had not thought to look for, a specific man in a specific house at the end of a specific mountain road who kept the lamp lit in the evenings and had said still standing when he could finally hold a pen, and who had not once, in all the weeks since, made her feel anything but exactly what she was. The post office door opened behind her, and Cole appeared with the supply list finished and a wrapped parcel under one arm that he had not mentioned he was getting. She said, "What's that?" He said, "Paper for accounts. You were getting low." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the steady, direct attention that she had come to know was simply how he looked at things he considered important. She said, "Thank you." He said, "It's just paper." She said, "I know." They walked back to the wagon in the brilliant Colorado winter, the mountains above them and the town behind them, and the ranch 8 miles up the road. And she thought, I found what I was looking for. And I found something else as well. The something else was the better part.